As the morning sun glinted off Boston's skyscrapers, Dorothy Wilson was focused on the final blueprints in her office. Her long brown hair was neatly tied back, and her sea-blue eyes carefully examined the details of the drawings. The blue blouse with the Wilson and Hamilton Real Estate Development logo suggested a decisiveness that belied her gentle personality. "Dorothy, is everything ready for tomorrow's meeting? The Vice President Eleanor is particularly interested in this project," said Margaret, poking her head through the office door. "Almost finished," Dorothy replied with a smile. "This sustainable community project is like my baby, and I want it to be perfect. That's why you're the top project manager in the company. But isn't your sister's wedding the day after tomorrow? Are you prepared for that?" Dorothy's expression clouded slightly. "Yes, I've done what I could. Ashley has everything perfectly planned, so I just need to do what I'm told." Margaret didn't miss the subtle expression that crossed her friend's face. "That sounds challenging. Do she and your mother listen to your opinions?" "Well," Dorothy sighed, "my suggestions are mostly ignored. After all, I'm just the single woman who only knows about work. According to my sister and mother, I have no sense of romance." In reality, Dorothy had been helping with her sister's wedding preparations for the past few weeks, squeezing it in around her work. Flower arrangements, invitation designs, venue decorations. Yet every suggestion she made was dismissed by her mother Carol and Ashley as old-fashioned or boring. Still, she quietly worked behind the scenes. "You're a saint to spend time with them," Margaret shook her head. Dorothy laughed and shrugged. "They're family. Since Dad passed away, we only have each other." George Wilson had died suddenly of a heart attack 10 years ago. After the death of her father, who was the founder of the real estate development company, her mother and sister began squandering his vast inheritance. Luxury living, overseas trips, high-end brands. Meanwhile, Dorothy, after earning her architecture degree, began working at her father's company, struggling to uphold the family honor and protect the business. "What are you doing tonight?" Margaret asked. "Final meeting with Mother and Ashley. I'll probably get more advice about my hairstyle and outfit," Dorothy replied with a hint of sarcasm. That evening, Dorothy stood at the doorway of her family home in suburban Boston. The two-story house with white columns and green lawns had once been filled with happy memories. But since her father's death, this house had become an uncomfortable place for Dorothy. "Finally, you're here," Carol exclaimed as she opened the door. "Ashley and the bridesmaids are having their final dress fitting, and you're late." "Good evening, Mother. I'm sorry, I was preparing for an important presentation." "Oh, that work talk again. Well, come in anyway." Carol made a gesture of rolling her eyes. Her face was unnaturally stretched with Botox and fillers. Entering the living room, Dorothy saw Ashley surrounded by her bridesmaids. When she spotted Dorothy, she flashed a smile of bright white teeth. "Big sister. Finally here. Everyone, this is my sister Dorothy. She's such a busy career woman. No time for romance." The women smiled politely, giving Dorothy sympathetic looks. Dorothy greeted them with a practiced smile. "That suit, did you come straight from work?" Ashley raised an eyebrow. "I want you to dress up a bit more for my wedding the day after tomorrow. You are my sister, after all." "Of course," Dorothy answered calmly. "I've prepared a pale blue dress." "Oh my, isn't that too flashy?" Carol interjected. "The bride's sister shouldn't stand out too much." "Mother, I'm her older sister," Dorothy quietly corrected. "Anyway, keep your speech short," Ashley suddenly said. "The guests will just be bored if you go on about architecture." "I understand," said Dorothy. Though conflicting emotions swirled inside her, she chose to suppress her feelings for her sister's special day. That evening's conversation revolved around Michael Hamilton's family. Ashley spoke excitedly. Michael's father is a partner in a large law firm, and his mother is actually a vice president at a real estate company. "She might be competing with your company, Dorothy." Dorothy swallowed hard. "What's her name?" "Eleanor Hamilton." "Do you know her?" The color drained from Dorothy's face. Eleanor was her boss, the vice president of Wilson and Hamilton Real Estate Development. She should have realized the connection when she heard Michael's last name was Hamilton, but she had never made the connection. "Dorothy? You look pale," Carol said. "Oh, I'm just tired." "Yes, I've heard the name Eleanor Hamilton," Dorothy answered vaguely. Considering her reputation at work, she thought it might not be good to reveal this connection. "You'll meet her tomorrow," Ashley said excitedly. "I'm sure you two will hit it off. I hear she's an amazing career woman too." Dorothy took a sip of wine from her glass, forcing a smile. The thought of meeting Eleanor at tomorrow's rehearsal dinner made her stomach turn. She feared that revealing herself as George Wilson's daughter might raise questions about the true motives behind Ashley's marriage. The night before the wedding, after returning home from the rehearsal dinner, Dorothy sat quietly on her bed and opened a small jewelry box. Inside was her father's watch and a letter he had left her. "To my beloved daughter. I want you to stand strong against whatever rough waves may come. I'm proud of your kindness and intelligence." Dorothy held the letter to her chest, promising herself that whatever happened tomorrow, she would keep her father's words in her heart. On the morning of the wedding day, the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Boston was bustling with activity. Dorothy arrived early and was quietly preparing in her room. The pale blue silk dress fit perfectly on her slender frame. The simple yet elegant design accentuated her natural beauty. Standing in front of the mirror, she pulled her hair up loosely and put on modest pearl earrings. "Too flashy," she asked herself, taking a deep breath. "Today is Ashley's day. I don't need to stand out." The hotel's grand ballroom was beautifully decorated in white and silver. Hundreds of white roses and lilacs filled the space, and crystal chandeliers sparkled from the ceiling. Dorothy quietly took her seat and watched as relatives and friends from both families entered. Her eyes naturally searched for Eleanor Hamilton. She spotted the elegant woman sitting in the front row, wearing a silver-gray suit. Beside her was a distinguished gentleman. Dorothy guessed it was Michael's father, Robert Hamilton. "I heard they're separated but came together for today," her cousin Jennifer whispered beside her. "They're separated?" "Yes. I heard from Michael's cousin. Eleanor was too career-oriented, and Robert didn't like that. But they're putting on appearances for their son's sake." Dorothy kept this information in mind as she watched the ceremony begin. Michael stood next to the pastor, looking nervously toward the door. Then the music played, and Ashley entered, escorted by Carol in place of a father. She was wrapped in a pure white mermaid dress with a long veil. The guests murmured in appreciation, and tears gleamed in Michael's eyes. The ceremony proceeded solemnly, vows were exchanged, and rings were placed. Dorothy sat quietly, watching her sister's happy expression while battling complicated emotions. She genuinely wished for her sister's happiness, but also felt sadness from the cold treatment she had received. The reception venue was even more lavishly decorated. Crystal centerpieces adorned each table, and a champagne tower was set up near the entrance. Dorothy was guided not to the main table but to one for relatives. She silently followed the direction. "After the best man's speech, we'll have speeches from the mother and sister," the wedding planner informed her. Dorothy nodded. "Understood." After dinner, the time for speeches began. First up was Michael's father, Robert. He held the microphone with a dignified posture and began speaking in a gentle voice. "Today, we have gathered to celebrate our son Michael and the beautiful bride Ashley he has chosen as his life partner. Marriage is the moment when two families become one. I hope they will have the courage and wisdom to face the challenges they will encounter in their life ahead." His words were warm and sincere, touching the hearts of everyone in the room. Next, Michael's friends gave humorous speeches, filling the venue with laughter. Then Carol stood up. She had already drunk several glasses of champagne and was slightly unsteady on her feet. Dorothy watched her mother with apprehension. Carol took the microphone and flashed a wide smile. Dorothy sensed something ominous behind that smile and felt a chill run down her spine. "Thank you all for gathering on this wonderful day. On this day to celebrate the departure of my beautiful daughter Ashley and the wonderful man she has chosen, Michael." Carol paused and looked around the room. Then suddenly she pointed at Dorothy. "And this is Dorothy, my other daughter. Her only redeeming quality is that she's single. The room fell silent for a moment, and Dorothy felt her face grow hot. She tried desperately to maintain her smile. Now, let's have a gift of $40,000 for the honeymoon from Big Sister. Carol raised her voice. Dorothy is such a successful career woman, she doesn't even know what to do with all the money she earns. An uncomfortable silence spread through the room, and guests exchanged glances. Michael's expression hardened, and Eleanor frowned. Robert seemed about to stand up but thought better of it. Dorothy slowly rose and calmly replied, "I'm sorry, but I cannot comply with such a request." Carol's face reddened, and her eyes burned with anger. "You've always been mean. Even on your sister's special day, you remain stingy." And then, Carol threw the contents of her champagne glass toward Dorothy's face. The cold liquid streamed down Dorothy's face and soaked her dress. Gasps of shock rose from the audience. Michael stood up and exclaimed, "Mrs. Wilson, please stop." But Carol was smiling. Ashley, after momentarily looking confused, gave a small smile. "Big sister, you always try to steal attention on my special day." Dorothy wiped off the champagne, squeezing the liquid from her hair with trembling hands. When her eyes met Eleanor's, Dorothy read sympathy and something else, understanding? Recognition, in her expression. Robert grabbed Carol's arm and quietly said, "You've gone too far." But the situation wasn't over yet. Ashley approached Dorothy and grabbed her arm. Her eyes burned with the competitiveness and jealousy she had harbored since childhood. "This is your real moment to shine, big sister," she whispered. Soaked with champagne, Dorothy tried to head to the bathroom, telling herself to stay calm, stay cool. Despite the dripping liquid from her face and hair, she was desperate to maintain her dignity. She was surrounded by sympathetic glances and a few small laughs. But Ashley grabbed her arm tightly, preventing her from moving. Ashley's white wedding dress sparkled like a jewel, highlighting her beauty, but her eyes were cold, almost snake-like. "Big sister, you always want to steal attention on my special day." Ashley's voice was sweet but poisonous. "You haven't changed since we were little." "Ashley, that's not my intention," Dorothy argued softly. "I just want to go to the bathroom and wipe my face." "Liar." Ashley's voice grew louder, drawing the room's attention again. "Everyone knows how you always try to stand above me. Always trying to steal the attention I get." Guests shifted uncomfortably, and some began to stand. Michael was heading toward his bride with a complex expression. Eleanor and Robert exchanged stern glances, both standing up. "Ashley, today is your day," Dorothy said gently. Yes, today is my day." Ashley raised her voice. "Yet you try to steal all the attention as usual. Overreacting to Mom's little joke. Demanding $40,000 is a little joke?" Dorothy replied in disbelief. "So stingy." Carol chimed in. Her lipstick was slightly smeared, and her eyes unfocused from drinking. "For a successful woman like you, that's nothing. A small amount to celebrate your sister's happy departure." Michael stood between them. "Let's stop this. We shouldn't make our guests uncomfortable anymore." "You be quiet," Ashley shouted at her groom. Her voice echoed throughout the room. "This is between me and my sister. It has nothing to do with you." Michael wore a shocked expression and stepped back. Anger colored Eleanor's face, and Robert placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Don't interfere with me just for today," Ashley yelled at Dorothy. And then she did something no one could have anticipated. She took a long candlestick from the table and deliberately tipped it toward the hem of Dorothy's dress. In an instant, a small flame began to burn on the pale blue silk. "Ashley!" Dorothy cried out in shock, frozen in terror as she watched smoke rising from her dress. The room fell completely silent. Time seemed to stand still. Ashley stepped back, standing there with a smile. There was a gleam of victory in her eyes. Even Carol was speechless at that moment. The small flame gradually grew larger, licking at the dry silk fabric. Dorothy tried to pat out the flame with her hands, crying out in fear. But the flame only grew larger with her movements. Someone help! Dorothy screamed. The people in the room seemed frozen with fear, as if no one could move. A satisfied smile crossed Ashley's face. You're being dramatic, big sister. It's just a little spark. At that moment, Michael rushed over, threw off his expensive tuxedo jacket, and began hitting the flames on Dorothy's dress. Get down on the floor, he commanded, pushing Dorothy to the floor. Then he quickly beat out the flames. The smell of smoke and burnt fabric spread throughout the room. Dorothy stood up trembling, looking down at the scorched dress on her lower body. The flame was out, but she felt the pain of a light burn on her right leg. Are you okay? Michael looked at her with a serious expression. His eyes reflected only genuine concern. Yes, thank you. Michael, Dorothy answered in a shaky voice. Ashley changed her expression, pretending to be surprised. Oh my, it was an accident. I had no idea. But no one believed her words. Many guests had witnessed the entire incident. The room was filled with tension and fear. Michael gave Ashley a cold look. Accident? Is that really what you're going to say? Of course. I wouldn't do such a thing on purpose. Ashley's voice trembled. I saw it, an elderly female guest said quietly. You deliberately knocked over the candle. Liar. Carol shouted, but her voice rang hollow. Eleanor quickly came to Dorothy's side. We should call medical staff. You need treatment for the burn. I'll help, Robert said, also approaching Dorothy. My wife is right. You need immediate treatment. Dorothy stood on still trembling legs, supported by the two. In her confusion and pain, she noticed that Eleanor had referred to Robert as my wife. Weren't they supposed to be separated? Ashley stared at Dorothy with a mixture of anger and fear. Her plan seemed to be backfiring. Michael had distanced himself from her and was helping care for Dorothy. This is just an accident. Why is everyone overreacting? Ashley raised her voice, but her words rang empty. Carol finally seemed to understand the gravity of what her daughter had done, and her face turned pale. Ashley, why? Shut up. Ashley shouted at her mother. You started this. The venue fell into complete chaos. Guests began leaving in fear and distress, the wedding planner was panicking, and the photographer continued taking photos without hesitation, documenting the moments of this historically bad wedding. Dorothy was guided to a chair in a corner of the room, supported by Eleanor and Robert. Her leg burn didn't seem too serious, but the wound in her heart was deep. The fact that her sister had truly tried to hurt her far exceeded the coldness she had felt from her family until now. I'm sorry. Dorothy said in a small voice. For ruining the wedding. You didn't ruin it, Eleanor said firmly. Her eyes shone as if she had made a decision. Dorothy Wilson, you are a stronger woman than I thought. Dorothy looked at her in surprise. You know me. Of course, Eleanor smiled slightly. I've known about you all along. I just didn't know you were the sister of the bride today. She exchanged glances with her husband Robert. There seemed to be communication beyond words between them. Robert nodded and stood up. Enough, he said in a low voice. Let's end this charade. Eleanor also stood up and walked determinedly toward the main table. The moment she took the microphone, the smiles disappeared from Ashley and Carol's faces. This wedding is over. Eleanor's voice was filled with authority. The room fell completely silent, and people who had been moving froze. The color drained from Ashley's face, and Carol was left speechless. Ladies and gentlemen, I am not only Michael Hamilton's mother but also the vice president of Wilson and Hamilton Real Estate Development, Eleanor continued quietly but forcefully. And Dorothy Wilson is our company's most excellent project manager, the person who saved the company her father, the late George Wilson, founded. Gasps and small murmurs ran through the room. Michael looked at Dorothy with a surprised expression, and Ashley's face was rigid with fear. George Wilson was an old friend of mine, Eleanor continued. When he died 10 years ago, the company was in crisis. Carol Wilson and Ashley Wilson squandered most of his legacy. Luxury cars, lavish trips, expensive jewelry. Carol interrupted with a trembling voice. Lies. What would you know? I know everything, Eleanor replied calmly. Because George told me everything before he died. And he asked me to watch over his eldest daughter, Dorothy. Dorothy covered her mouth with a trembling hand, still seated. She had no idea about the relationship between her father and her boss. After her father's death, Dorothy studied architecture in college and began working at her father's company immediately after graduation. She quietly paid off debts and rebuilt the company to ensure the family name wasn't tarnished. Thanks to her, Wilson and Hamilton is now a leading company in the industry. Eleanor fixed Carol and Ashley with a sharp gaze. Meanwhile, what were you two doing? Carol, didn't you use up most of the Wilson family assets and rely on Dorothy's salary to live? And Ashley. Eleanor paused for a moment. You should tell the real reason you approached Michael. Michael looked at Ashley with a confused expression. What is she talking about? Ashley's face turned pale, and she said in a trembling voice, Don't believe her, Michael. She's lying. Then is this a lie? Eleanor took out a small folder. Ashley Wilson's relationship with Michael began right after he was promoted to junior partner at Hamilton Law Firm. Is that timing coincidental? Is it also coincidental that she was previously engaged to two wealthy men, both engagements suddenly broken off? The color drained from Michael's face. Ashley, is this true? Ashley stammered, trying to approach Michael. I love you, Michael. That's the truth. And what did you tell him last year? Eleanor said coldly. Didn't you say, considering the Hamilton family assets, marriage would be a good purchase? Michael stepped back, covering his face with both hands. Carol tried to approach her daughter, but Ashley pushed her away. I've had enough, Eleanor continued. For the past 10 years, I've seen Dorothy's talent and integrity. She never boasts about her achievements and always puts her family first. Yet what I witnessed today was shameful treatment of her. Robert took the microphone and quietly continued, Michael, son. You're an adult now, so you must judge for yourself. But as your father, let me say one thing, the person you were about to marry today seems to have been hiding the truth. Michael slowly stood up and approached Ashley. His eyes darkened with sadness and anger. Answer me, Ashley. Is what Eleanor's saying true? Ashley answered tearfully, I met you before you became a lawyer. It might have been a plan at first, but I really do love you. At those words, a look of decision crossed Michael's face. He took the engagement ring from Ashley's hand and quietly said, Ashley. Ashley let out a cry and collapsed to the floor. Carol tried to help her up, but her daughter pushed her away. It's your fault. You started it all. Eleanor approached Dorothy and took her hand. Dorothy, your father was very proud of you. The last words he said to me before he died were, please protect my daughter. I've been watching over you from the shadows, but I can't stay silent anymore. Eleanor handed Dorothy a small envelope. This is the last letter your father left. He left you 50% of the company's shares. Legally, you are effectively the owner of Wilson and Hamilton. Dorothy received the envelope with trembling hands. Tears welled in her eyes. But, why didn't you tell me until now? Because you needed to succeed on your own, Eleanor said gently. And you did. Your father was right. As he said, you stood strong. Michael approached Dorothy and quietly said, I'm sorry. I didn't know. Dorothy looked up at him. It's not your fault. Carol and Ashley stood trembling with tears and anger in a corner of the venue. Their social status had collapsed, and guests were distancing themselves from them. Finally, Eleanor addressed the entire room, ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for how things have turned out today. Please be careful on your way home. 1 year later, in the top-floor conference room of Wilson and Hamilton headquarters, Dorothy Wilson sat at the head of the large table, having just concluded a meeting. That concludes the first quarter report. Thank you all for your excellent work. As the participants left the room, only Eleanor Hamilton remained. Her hair had more silver streaks, but her eyes retained the same sharp, intelligent sparkle as before. Wonderful results, Dorothy. Your green architecture initiative is revolutionizing the market. Dorothy smiled. I couldn't have done it without your support. Their relationship had changed dramatically over the past year. Eleanor had become a mother figure to Dorothy, and they had made it a tradition to have dinner together every Sunday. Robert and Michael will be joining us for dinner tonight, Eleanor said. Hearing Michael's name, Dorothy's cheeks turned slightly red. Several months after the tragic conclusion of the wedding, he had contacted Dorothy seeking professional advice. Initially, it was purely a professional relationship, but over time, a friendship had begun to blossom between them. I'm looking forward to it, Dorothy replied. As she was preparing to leave the office, her secretary entered the room. Ms. Wilson, there's a call from the hospital. Your mother has been admitted. Dorothy paused. Contact with Ashley and Carol had been almost non-existent since that day. Ashley had tried to reconcile several times, but Dorothy had chosen to keep her distance. The wounds in her heart were not yet fully healed. You don't need to go, Eleanor said quietly. Considering what those two did to you. Dorothy took a deep breath. I have to go. She's still my mother. At the hospital, a nurse guided Dorothy to Carol's room. However, upon entering the hospital room, Carol appeared healthy, sitting in bed watching television. Ashley was sitting in a chair by the window and stood up when she saw Dorothy. Big sister. You came. I heard Mother was sick, Dorothy replied calmly. Carol cleared her throat. Just a little chest pain. The doctor said it was due to stress. Dorothy understood the situation. This was a trap to lure her back. After a year, the manipulative nature of her mother and sister hadn't changed. I see. Well, I'm glad you both seem fine, she turned to leave. Wait. Ashley cried out. We need money. You own half the company, don't you? We're family, Dorothy. Dorothy slowly turned back. Family? When did you consider me family? When you set fire to my dress. Or when Mother humiliated me in front of everyone. Silence filled the room. I don't hold a grudge anymore, Dorothy continued. That's for my own sake. Hatred is too heavy a burden to carry. But trusting and forgiving are different matters. She headed for the door. And take care of yourselves. Walking through the streets of Boston in the twilight, Dorothy had reached a decision. A new chapter was beginning in her life. Her relationships with Eleanor, Robert, and perhaps Michael were teaching her the true meaning of family. It wasn't about blood ties but about bonds of mutual respect and support. That night at dinner, Dorothy raised her wine glass. To new beginnings. Eleanor, Robert, and Michael likewise raised their glasses to her. The sunset streaming through the window cast a warm light on their circle. Having found her true family at last, Dorothy could finally begin to walk her own path in life.